What's up, Wargamers? Welcome back to World of Wargaming. I'm Isaiah. Today I invite you to grab a chair, a delicious beverage, and maybe a tasty snack, and let me talk at you for a minute. Today, I'd like to talk at you about this game. Star Wars Shatterpoint from Atomic Mass Games. This is their newest foray into the tabletop wargaming space. They also brought us Marvel Crisis Protocol. And like Marvel Crisis Protocol, this game is at a much larger scale. It's about 38 to 40 millimeter, I believe, which is awesome for painting. It does make it a lot easier to paint the models, and it makes it big enough to where they can etch in a lot of those details on the model to make it easier to find them. However, it does remove a lot of the potential to get double use out of your models to play other games, which is a little bit of a bummer. And you do have to adjust for terrain needs. You do have to upscale terrain and purchase some of their terrain or make some of your own terrain to the right scale. So there is some extra money or time that has to be spent in preparation for the game. Now, as for the game itself, the art style in the book is pretty much this the whole way through, kind of that Clones War animated series style illustrations, which is fine. It's pretty, it's nice to look at, it's entertaining, it's very bright and colorful, which are things that I genuinely enjoy. Now, one thing that I will say off the bat with this game is that this one I've played a few games and I do enjoy the game a lot, but I had to play the game to understand the game. I don't know if it's because of the way the rule book is laid out or the way my brain works or any number of factors and variables, but for me, it was very difficult to get a feeling for the game reading through the book. Now, as soon as I read it, and then as soon as I saw those things in action on the table in front of me, it clicked immediately into place. There was very little cognitive comprehension problems once I saw it in action. And that may just be my learning style. Normally, reading from a book, I can get a pretty good idea of how the game will play on the table. This game was very, very difficult for me personally to do that with. And again, I am only a very tiny, small, infinitesimally nothing speck of the greater population of individuals. So your experience with this literature may be very, very, very different than mine. But for me, I needed to see it in action to fully grasp how to play the game. All of that being said, we come into the first pages of the book, which cover kind of key concepts, which are your missions, your struggles, and your objectives. Now, one of the things that's very interesting about this game is the way objectives are set out. You lay out the same 9 objective markers every single time you set up to play the game, and they always go in the exact same place. They have 2 sides. They have like a turned on, kind of orangey yellow side, and they have an off side, which is just flat gray. As the game progresses, the active objectives will change. So of those 9, you'll have some of them that are turned on, some of them that are turned off. And they change as the struggle changes. Struggles are the big core of the game. They're how you win. There are 3 struggles in a game of Shatterpoint. You need to win 2 of those struggles in order to be victorious in the game. A struggle is basically an individual scenario. The first struggle, there are 3 of each, 3 first, 3 twos, 3 threes. You randomly select 1 of each when you start your game. And it'll tell you which of the objectives, let me get this where you can see it, need to be flipped over. So as we can see here, this is an example of a struggle 1, so everything is very symmetrical. And then the struggle 2s and 3s will be a little bit different. There will be 2 options there, and whoever lost the last struggle gets to choose the orientation in which one of these is going to be used. The different symbols here represent which one is the primary objective, which is worth extra points. Whoever wins the 2 struggles first wins the game. To win a struggle, and this is another part that kind of tripped me up a little bit. To win a struggle, you have a tracker. It starts at 0 and then goes up to 8 on each side. During your turn, you gain points for your objectives. Your objectives, those points will move the clear cube from 0 However, if you score 2 points, it'll move it 2 spaces towards your end of the board. You gain black cubes, which are called momentum, for doing things during your turn, such as injuring an enemy unit, or if at the end of your turn, the clear cube is on your opponent's side of the board. Those will get you extra black momentum. Or if the clear cube ends on 0. Everybody gets one in that situation. Once the clear cube and one of your black momentum cubes overlap each other or are occupying the same space, at that point, that player, whoever did that, has won that struggle, and you draw the next one and move on. And again, whoever wins the first 2 out of 3 wins the game. That was one of the concepts that, for me to read it, and it may be the same case for you to hear it, but that was one of the concepts of the game that was really, really, really hard for me to understand reading it from the book. Again, seeing it in action, clear as day, makes perfect sense. Reading it from the book was difficult for me. Next, we come into the parts of a card section. I'm just going to tell you, the anatomy of what your units can do. This, straightforward, clear, easy to understand, no problems here. The book, and in general, does do a very, very good job of giving you good examples of things for most stuff. And it does good with giving you visuals to help you match up what the thing is with the symbol that represents it on the token or the card or whatever. Here's a picture of the struggle tracker. There it goes. So the clear one starts here. You each start with a black one on each side. And then as the clear one moves back and forth, as the momentum of the fight changes, once that clear one overlaps one of yours or your opponent's black ones, that struggle is ended. The unit cards in the game are double-sided. One side will have general kind of force building information on it, either how many SP it provides or how many PC points costs it requires to field. It'll also have their era, their name, their alignment, and whether they are a primary unit, a secondary unit, or a supporting unit. The other side of their card will have special abilities that they can do, things like force pushes or force lightning or rallying Mandalorians or whatever kind of random abilities they might have. That'll be on the back side of that card. Usually you use the front side for putting your team together, use the back side for actually playing the game. Next up, we talk about the unit order cards, which this has to deal with how you activate models in the game, and this is one of my favorite parts of Shatterpoint. I think this is a really, really choice system. The only other game that I know that goes quite this random at the moment is Veritwood, which uses tokens in a bag, basically. But here, every unit in your fire team has a card, and you put all those cards into a deck. Now, unlike something like Conquest, where you get to set the order of those things, in this you shuffle it up, and it is totally random. You just draw a card off the top, if that happens, and then you do something with that model. Now, there is one way around that. There is a reserve rule, which we'll probably talk about in a few minutes. But there is you do have one way to potentially circumvent a really, really, really bad draw, and it's good that they have that in there to kind of give you a little bit of a mulligan. Now, in that deck of cards, you also have what is called a Shatterpoint card, which looks, get it? Yes, looks like this. It's kind of everybody's faces all broken in and on the same picture. That's a wild card. You can activate any model on your fire team with that card, including models that have already activated. On that same page, we have some information about different kinds of abilities. And again, here they do a good job of giving you the icon as well as the explanation of what it does to help your brain internalize that information. So you have active abilities that can be used anytime during your activation. You have reactive abilities that happen whenever a triggering event occurs, which will be listed in the ability. You have innates, which are always active and in effect. You have tactics, which are a special thing that happens at the beginning of a unit's ability. It's this kind of cross-looking thing. You can see it right there on Kalani. That's something that as soon as you activate that model, that ability occurs. And then you have identities, which are special innate abilities that are unique to primary units. primary units tend to be the more famous characters from the universe. So your Ashoka, Darth Maul, Vader, Obi-Wan, Anakin, those are going to be your kind of primary units for the most part. Secondary units tend to be named individuals, but not necessarily ones that are as important. So like your Bo-Katan, your Gar Saxon, your Kalani, individuals like that. And then you have supporting units, which are just kind of your faceless minions, just clone troopers or random Mandalorians or battle droids or just whatever kind of regular dudes that are occupying the struggle. Now, whether they be primary, secondary, or supporting cards, they have a second, or types, they have a second card that goes with them called a stance card. This has information for their attacks, their weapons and loadouts, their defenses against ranged and firing and all that stuff. Your primary characters have a double-sided one. They have multiple stances. So here we go. So these are both Ashoka. This is a battle droid. Here we've got our weapons. Both our attack for ranged, attack for range, attack for melee, and then our melee defense, range defense. And when we deal damage, we have this thing. Just called a battle track or a damage track. Every unblocked hit gets you 1 square on that track, and this is very unique to me. I've only really seen this kind of damage system in one other game, and that's Arena Rex. It also has a damage track type of system for doing damage. It's a game that I've been looking at but haven't gotten it. Miles, but we're not here to talk about Arena Rex. We're here to talk about Shatterpoint. I'm just making a basis of comparison of where else I've seen that mechanic, and that's really the only other example that I can think of. If you know other examples of games that use that type of mechanic, drop that stuff in the comments because I want to know about it. I suppose we should talk about the dice. The game does use proprietary dice, just like MCP did. It's not a thing that I love. It's actually something that I outright dislike. I don't really like proprietary dice systems. It just feels like a trap. But in the core box, they do give you in pretty much enough of them. You might need to pick up 1 extra set. It comes with 8 of the attack dice, which are gray D8s. And it comes with 6 of the defense dice, which are blue D6. And the attack dice have 4 different options faces. They have a crit, which is a circle with a star. They have a hit, which is just the star. They have a fail, which is like a ninja star, kind of like a shuriken that's shattered. That's a fail. And then they have expertise, which is a kite shape. The expertise, when you roll, you compare how many of those expertise dice you got to the weapon or armor that you were using, and it'll give you things like extra hits, extra blocks. It can downgrade your opponent's crits. It can give you a reposition. It's lots of things that can happen there. So you just compare your expertise to your stance card, and it'll tell you what to do. On the defense dice, we have 6 sides, but 3 different options. There's blocks, which are kind of a target, like a crosshair looking thing, like kind of like a reticle. Expertise, which is just a regular diamond. And fails, which I don't remember what the fail looks like. But there's a fail in there. When you make an attack roll, it is an opposed roll. My attack dice against your defense dice. Your blocks cancel out my hits. Blocks cannot cancel crits. However many hits or crits the attacker has remaining, that's how many stops or how many squares they get to do on their damage track, on their stance card. Next we come into one of the parts of Star Wars that everybody wants to hear about, and that's the Force and how the Force comes into and interacts and is involved in gameplay. So, your primary characters will generate, they'll say on the front side of their card, you can see it right there on this Ashoka card, they'll say how many Force they generate. So, for example, when I played with Annie and Ashoka, and I had a total of, I want to say, 7 Force. And then your Force is then generated, and that's how much you have for a round through your Shatterpoint deck. Not a round of the game, but when you reshuffle your Shatterpoint deck, all your character cards, that's when you refill your Force level. So that's what you have That amount is what you have to use until you get to the end of the deck and start back through. After that, we come into measurement. Measurement in the game, much like MCP, uses a set of widgets that you can buy on their own, or they come in the core starter. The core starter is really probably the best way to get into the game because it has the terrain, the widgets, the tokens, the dice, 2 armies, everything you need. There are 2 movement tools, a regular movement and a dash or jump movement, which is a shorter one, and they pivot and break, not break, but they pivot, bend, pivot, swing, so that you can go around corners and stuff like that. When you measure, you put the curved side of it next to your base, and then your base goes touching the other side of it. You don't have to take all of the movement. You can stop short, you just can't go further than. Range is very, very similar. There are 4 widgets, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 1. You will see the 1 range mentioned at times is the side. It's the short end of any of those widgets are all count as a 1. And range works the exact same way. You use the widget, check it. If it's your base and their base are under the widget, you're good to go. The game does not really account for like elevation measuring like this, so anytime you measure, you're just measuring on a straight plane from your model to their model. We then come to a section on setting up the battlefield, which is pretty basic. As I mentioned earlier, you lay out your objectives in the same way every time, then you set your terrain up. Now, when you set your terrain up, if you have a walkway or anything like that that is going over an objective, that objective will immediately move up to the highest elevation possible. The game is played on a 3x3. It's a pretty standard skirmish game size table. With your objectives, to control them, you must be within a range marker 2 of the objective, which is a pretty good sized gap. You don't necessarily have to be right up on the objectives. And another beautiful thing is that you do not have to babysit the objectives. It is yours until it is taken away from you. You control it by having an active model on it. Your opponent can take it from you by having more active models on it than you do. We go to control and objectives, which I just mentioned. Winning the game, which we talked about earlier, is whoever gets 2 out of 3 struggles wins the game. When you deploy, you do an initiative roll, which is 4, maybe 5 attack dice. So I can't find it, but I think it's 4 dice, 4 attack dice, and you're looking for whoever has the most crits. Then the next tiebreaker is hits, and then the next tiebreaker is expertise, I believe. If it's tied all the way down, then you would re-roll and go again. Whoever is the first player will deploy the first unit, or the first half of their fire, the first squad will deploy their first squad. That you place your primary within 2 of a table edge, and then everybody else in that squad goes within a range 1 of that model. And that goes back and forth. We then come into a nice kind of numbered list of things to do when playing the game. So step 1 is to resolve effects that happen at the start of the turn with the active player going first. Then your active player reveals their order card. They can choose, if there are none in their deck, then they shuffle it. If it's response to a defeated unit, they would remove the card and reveal a new order card. When a unit is completely removed from the game, you pull their card from the deck when you get to it. Active player then activates the unit that corresponds to the card they drew. They then resolve effects that happen at the start of the unit's activation, like tactics or anything. And it's always active player first with these things. Then the unit resolves its activation. Resolve effects that happen at the end of activation. The activation ends. Resolve effects that happen at the end of the turn. Active player moves the struggle token 1 space toward their momentum token for each active objective they controlled. If the unit that just activated has a number of injury tokens equal to its durability, then they are defeated, which means removed. We'll talk about how that injured, we'll talk about that in a second. And then the active player's turn is now over and it goes back to the other person and they go through the same steps. Now a little bit closer in when you activate, let's zoom in a little bit on activating a model. So when you activate, you have 2 actions, 2 basic actions, and then you have whatever is on the backside of their card as abilities that you can use. You can only do each thing once. So your basic actions are move, obvious, don't need to explain there. Focus, which gives you +1 to your next attack die roll. You can fight, combat. You can use an ability. You can recover. Or you can... recover is to heal one. Well, those rules are a little bit later in the book. It's you can, within two of you, you can remove a damage or a condition for each point of recovery that you're doing. Or you can take cover, which is to get a hunker token. Hunker tokens are the only way that you can have cover in the game. There is no like line of sight blocks. Without a hunker token, you don't have any kind of cover. If you do have cover, it gives you an extra dice for your defense roll. All hunker tokens go away though as soon as an enemy is within range 2 of you. Now sometimes you will have multiple character units, and this is a part that was real sketchy for me in the beginning. So for example, with the 501st Clone Troopers, it's 2 models on different bases, but they're the same unit. They activate at the same time, and they do the same thing. So when you tell them to move, they both move. When you tell them to attack, they both attack. So they don't have to attack the same target, they don't have to stay within any kind of range of each other. They just have to activate at the same time and then do the same actions at the same time. And they share a health pool. That's another one that tripped me up really bad. Because if you shoot down the one that's on this side of the board, the one who's on the other side of the board who had nothing to do with that also becomes injured and wounded. Under movement, we got a few different kinds of movement. We have an advancing, which is just a normal, regular move. We have a climb, which uses the short dash tool to move, and it ignores elevation. Dash, which is the short move forward. Jump, which also uses the dash tool and it can overlap impassable terrain and elevation, and you can end on any elevation. With a dash, you have to be on the same elevation or lower. Then, yep, and jump. Jump is the end of it. And then we got some pretty good examples of movement with some beautifully photographed models. They did a good job with that aspect of it for sure. You can't have overlapping. You can't be over the edge of something or over another base or anything like that. None of that is acceptable. We talked a little bit about making an attack already as far as how the dice rolls go, so I'm not going to go too deep into that again. A couple things to touch on is engagement range. Engagement range is when you are within range 2 of an enemy model, and at that point you're stuck with your melee attack. So if you want to make sure that if you want to be shooting at them, you want to make sure that you end your movement outside of that too. However, if you want to commence to a round of fisticuffs, then you want to make sure that you are within range 2. You don't necessarily have to be base to base, just got to be within range 2. And while we're adjacent to the topic of those combat dice, on your combat tree, which again, however many hits you have left over, you get to do that many squares on your damage tree. And there are lots of symbols in there, so let's talk for a moment about what they mean. And we'll put this up here where we can see it. So we have damage, we have push, we have strain, we have pin, we have expose, we have disarm. And I may have got those in the wrong order. I did. The first one, just the kind of the zigzag, that's your damage. That is going to do damage to that model. A shove uses the short shove tool, which is about an inch push that you get to push them back. Strained means that they have to either spend an action to recover to get rid of that condition, or they will take 3 damage. Disarmed means that they do not get to use their expertise dice on their next attack. Exposed means they do not get to use their expertise dice on their next defense. And pinned means that the unit cannot move that turn. They have to give up their movement to get rid of the pin marker, the pin token. Now in there are also some things that are beneficial to you. Those can include getting a free advance, like a reposition, getting to climb, dash, jump, reposition, heal, or use an active ability. So you can get some things that can happen to you. You can potentially kind of do some very Jedi-ish stuff, like cutting somebody up and then jumping away and being all nimbly-bimbly through the trees and whatnot. Now with that damage, that you sustain through attacks and other things, you have a set number of health. So for example, Bo-Katan has 8 health. When she gets to 8, she gets a wounded token. Pretty sure I got it. I think it's wounded, and then it becomes injured. You get a wounded token. Once you have that, you can no longer hold objectives. and you're just kind of stuck there. When that unit activates again, all their damage falls off and one of their conditions fall off. And then they can then hold objectives again at the end of their turn. So at the end of their turn, that wounded token flips over to the other side to an injured token, which is this kind of EKG stat line type thing. Once the model, at the end of a model's activation, if they have a number of injured tokens equal to their durability, which is the bottom number right there, then that model is defeated and removed from play. Quick retcon, at the beginning, when you're removing the damage and the conditions, that's when you flip from wounded to injured. Now also, while a model is injured, any force costs that they have cost 1 extra force for each injury token that they have on them. So if the ability normally costs 2, once they're injured, that ability costs 3. We then come into a little bit of a section about terrain, which is pretty straightforward. Discuss with your opponent whether you want it to be clear, blocked, impassable, passable. It's really just a matter of, you can make the terrain as complex as you would like it or as simple as you would like it to be. Just discuss it with your opponent ahead of time. Make sure everybody's clear and understands what is what. Now with the terrain, one thing I do want to stop and talk on are ingress points. These are things like ladders. If a model ends their movement within an inch or within range 1 of an ingress point, so a ladder, they can immediately scale up that ladder and then end themselves and place that model within 1 of the top of the ladder, or the top of the ingress point. So that's how it's how you move up and down. There's no like climbing double your whatever because you're using widgets. So it's just if you end at the bottom of the ladder, you can climb the ladder. Next we come to hunker tokens and cover, which I was informed when playing the games the other day that this is something that was very quickly fact and errated by atomic mass. So originally, if you were within range 1 of a piece of cover and it was between you and the person shooting at you, you would gain the benefit of cover. They've since changed that, so my understanding now is that the only way to have cover at all is to have a hunker token. I think part of that is because most of the defenses in the game are very, very kind of lackluster, especially compared to the number of dice that you are rolling to attack. And that's because I think that they wanted the game to be very, very bashy. They wanted damage flying around the table. And I would say that they achieved that goal. Then come to some appendix and keyword things, and on the very, very back of the book we got a handy dandy quick reference for your turn sequence, your attack sequence, what the dice faces mean, and what all the icons mean. This is probably the best part of this, in my opinion, the icon part, because when you're first learning the game, it's really, really tough to remember what all these little pictographs mean. So that's a really, really, really good reference to have at a really good place. Just on the back of the book, you don't have to flip for it. You just have to flip the book over. Beautifully placed. And that brings us to the end of the book. So, a couple things to touch on. Much like MCP, Shatterpoint is not a cheap miniatures game. Even though it's a skirmish game, you're not using that many models, it's not cheap by any means. The core box MSRP is at about $165. If you get it from your LGS or certain stores online, you may be able to find it at a little bit less than that, which is pricey, but it does legitimately come with absolutely everything out of the box that you need to play the game and have a great time. So a little bit pricey, but not awful. The individual unit boxes are, I want to say, $50 or $60. I want to say I've seen them at $60 at some places, but my FLGS has them marked at $50. And most of those are going to contain like a squad of models, with the exception of they just released Vader and Obi-Wan not too long ago, and those don't come with full fleshed out squads, I don't believe. But they are some of the first models that actually have a different era on them than the Clone Wars. They both have both. They have the Clone Wars era marker and the Galactic Civil War for the more, not modern, because all of Star Wars happened a long, long time ago, but for the original Star Wars. So Han, Luke, Chewie, which that's the part of the game. I probably will not buy any of the other squads until they start releasing squads from like Empire, Jedi, Star Wars. That's the era of the game that I am more interested in buying, painting, building, collecting those models and playing with them, because it's the one that I grew up with. I'm more familiar with it. I don't really know anything about the Clone Wars. I just don't. I haven't. I've seen snippets of the animated series. I've never sat down and watched it all the way through, so I don't know a lot of these characters or a lot of what's going on. So it doesn't hit the same notes for me. I'm really just here for the gameplay. And I mean, lightsaber is a lightsaber. You know, I know what a lightsaber is. But for me to invest any more money in the game, especially at the price point that they have it marked at, is going to take a little bit of time. Now, that being said, that $50 for 4 models is pricey, but when you look at MCP, it's, you know, like $40 for 2 models. So maybe it's a better value. I'm not entirely sure. Either way, that's going to do it for me ranting and raving at y'all today. Thanks so much for tuning in, hanging out, let me talk at you for a little bit. I hope you have an absolutely amazing rest of your day. And as always, I'd like to say a big, huge, from the bottom of my heart, thank you to our patrons who support us and pledge to us over on Patreon. You guys are the absolute best. If you enjoyed the content you saw here today and that's something that you would like to consider doing to help out the channel, go over there, check out the link in the description, check out the Patreon. There's a lot of cool stuff over there, including access to our Discord server, talk to me, hang out with me, talk about our work, what we got going on in the hobby, some shout outs, all kinds of cool stuff. Check it out if that's something that you think you would be into. And regardless of whether or not you do that, I want you to know that I am incredibly grateful that you decided to stop by and spend part of your day with me today, rolling dice and pushing toy soldiers around. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. And as always, may the dice be ever in your favor.